Newcomers, we're excited to have you here with us today for the first time. In this episode, we're exploring how to navigate the complexities of performance management in an evolving workplace. Now, as I quickly share some housekeeping notes, drop in the comments or chat box where you're joining in from. We are recording today's session, so if you're interested in a replay, be on the lookout for an email later today. That email is also going to include a survey for feedback, as well as a number of resources that are aligned with today's conversation. We suggest putting your phone on Do Not Disturb, quitting out of your email and messaging apps so you can really get the most out of today's show. And it's also going to help with your audio and video quality. And we love interaction, so feel free to share your thoughts and comments with us in the chat. Now, to get this show underway, I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. Our guest for today is Vice President of Product and Advisory at the Neuroleadership Institute. She brings decades of customer-focused cross-industry consulting experience to NLI's product development and expansive range of professional services. She works closely with our largest clients at the strategy level to design custom brand-based strategies. Her work has been instrumental to NLI's research on organizational growth mindset, culture, and leadership. She's the author of our seminal research on brain-friendly leadership and organizational growth mindset. She holds a degree in cognitive neuroscience from Columbia University in New York and multiple professional certifications. A warm welcome to the Vice President of Product and Advisory at the Neuroleadership Institute, Rachel Cardero. Rachel, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Shelby. So excited to see you all in the chat, see Tennessee, Phoenix, California, and so many other places.
Yes. And our moderator for today leads the research team at the Neuroleadership Institute, where she focuses on translating cognitive and social neuroscience into actionable solutions for organizations, as well as helps to communicate relevant research in an accessible manner for the public. Previously, she was a professor at Dominican College and New York University and a researcher at the Nathan Klein Institute. She holds a bachelor's degree from Brown University and a PhD in neuroscience from New York University. A warm welcome to the Senior Director of Research at NLI, Dr. Emma Saro. Thanks for being here, Emma, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Shelby. Hi, Rachel. I'm so excited to be here with you. I think it's our first one together, right?
Yeah, first one.
Yeah. So welcome all. This is an exciting one to have. We've been meaning to have this discussion for a few weeks, knowing that this topic has been kind of creeping up towards the top of organizations' priority list. And we know this, and for anyone who was with us last week, I think we talked about this stat as well, but latest really profound stat coming out of Gallup, basically that showed that only 2% of CHROs from the Fortune 500 companies really strongly agree that their performance management systems inspires their employees to improve. And it's not just the CHROs, it's also the employees. They feel the same. Only 1 in 5 of them report that their performance reviews are transparent, fair, and even inspire better performance. I'd love to hear from you all if you feel the same thing. We love interaction in the chat as well. So does this resonate with you? Do you feel the same? We also found in our own recent last year's summit, we polled organizations and found that up to 90% of the organizations are planning to make or have recently made changes to their performance management. So why is this happening? We could cover a whole realm of reasons why this could be happening, but one of them could just be the steady state of this hybrid workplace. How do we best manage performance when people aren't always in the same place and aren't always working together and seen by managers? What needs to change? And also, we've talked about this before as well, the calls for accountability and psychological safety, both are being asked for. The calls have only gotten louder, but how do we truly manage performance, asking for more accountability while maintaining high levels of psychological safety? So that's the current state. Love to hear your thoughts about, how you feel your organization is doing with performance management and what you think needs to be changed. But this is where I want to bring Rachel in. So Rachel, given your years of experience, what would you say are the keys to changing the course of performance management?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I'm seeing amazing things in the chat right now, like Mariana saying, I've never heard performance management and inspire used together in a sentence. And I think that that's a great phrase to sum up, I think, how we've been experiencing performance management. Definitely what I'm seeing from our clients.
Mhm.
For those of you that might be a little newer to NLI or our performance practice, this is a place where we've really tried to lean in over the years. We have over 35 academic journals that are peer reviewed. We have over 150 different thought leader publications. And in this space specifically, we have an average behavior change percentage of about 90%.
Wow.
And so we really are passionate about performance and performance management. And I think that this came from a place of us asking ourselves, how can we help people be better at work? And when you start to think about that, how can people get better at work? Performance management is just one of this like glaring areas where it's like, as one of our audience members said, right? Like it's inspiration, motivation, and great feelings don't often go together. What I'm seeing right now, though, is quite interesting. Like we're in this period where everybody's talking about how much change they're experiencing. VUCA environments, technological change, cultural change, honestly, all of the social changes that we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis, additional polarization, et cetera, hybrid workplaces, all the things that you mentioned. And what we're seeing from a performance standpoint is people are actually starting to go backwards and look for structures that feel familiar, that feel common to them, even if they know they don't work. And so they're saying, in this hybrid work environment, let me actually go back to the stick and not the carrot. And because I know it. And if I have to deal with all this change, let me just eliminate this one thing. But I mean, it's just not working as the data shows.
Yeah, absolutely. So what, we often talk about things like, clarifying expectations. These are things that we should include in performance management if we have them. How do we do that? Clarify expectations. How do we truly motivate individuals? Because you won't get your best work out of individuals unless you truly inspire and motivate them, really getting into their intrinsic motivators. And how do you maintain that over time? And I think one of the ways, and we'll get into this later on, but one of the ways that you can kind of tap into all of those is to really choose and develop the right conversations. And we are masters of conversations at NLI.
Yeah, definitely. We love to think and talk about ourselves as conversation architects a lot of the time. And when I'd love that you're mentioning the accountability piece and like actually tapping into people's motivation. We know from a science perspective, if you have people in that threat state, if you have them worried, they are less creative, they are less collaborative, they are less able to engage in rational thought, good decision making. And so for over 26 years at this point, I think we have been trying to help people figure out how to move people specifically throughout the performance management process out of a state of unmanageable threat to a place of manageable threat, because it's hard with performance to take all the threat out of it. But I think that exactly what you mentioned are those keys to the process and to the cycle.
Yeah.
So one, just to reiterate some of the things that you mentioned, if you can really help people understand in a way that is inspiring and feels light and motivating, right? So this is that growth type of accountability. What is expected of them? Clarity of expectations are key. And tying that to the overall objectives of your performance management cycle or process. What are you actually trying to get out of it? How do you hold people accountable for growth, for improvement, for learning? And then those conversations, super key. Those conversations are what make feedback palatable, enjoyable sometimes for some people. But that's what gives people those moments of insight and those flashes of, oh, shoot, I need to act differently now.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think one of the things, and for many of us, we know that performance reviews might be around the corner. They're coming up. So this is top of mind. What kind of model do you use when you do your performance reviews? Do you still do performance reviews? I know there are some of our guests have removed them altogether, and I'd love to know if this is working. But there has to be some kind of review. It's a form of feedback. So how do you do that and maintain that human connection? right? Because it's very easy to swing in one direction, make it easy in one sense because it's very transactional and you provide like a number to an individual and that gives you the result. But where's the human in that? And how do you expect there to be any kind of performance improvement following?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think like when we work with organizations to help them adjust their processes, we're working with a large number of organizations. There are tons of people right now, and I would love to see in the chat, yeah, like as Emma said, share with us where you are. Are you all working on an update? Are you seeing changes in your system? But we're seeing a large number of companies trying to refresh their current process. And they're asking themselves, how can we make this less of a burden? How can we make it more engaging? And I think a lot of it does come down to those conversations. And so
Yeah.
we start all of our processes asking organizations, going back to those objectives, what do you want to achieve through this? And then you can help create this really positive sense of accountability around those objectives. Do you want growth, as I mentioned? Do you want learning? Do you want high performance? We're getting a lot of high performance organizations where, you're treating how people show up at work almost like an Olympic athlete, right? Are you getting coaching? Are you watching yourself? Are you constantly improving? Are you stretching yourself every day? When you get those targets, when you get that built into the system, then our approach really centers on those conversations. So you can actually break down your conversation architecture into the critical conversations that you need to have, and you can help managers understand exactly what to do in those conversations, what to do less of and what to do more of, so that this way, even when conversations get smushed together, even when conversations might happen out of order, they have the tools and the skills to really help people drive their own performance and have those aha moments. So with goal setting, are you stretching yourself? What matters to you? Are these goals manageable, or have you created 20 or 50 of them? With your check-ins, are you continuing to keep yourself accountable to that growth, to that learning, to that high performance? And there's an art and a science to all of this, to each one of those conversations that we think is really important.
Yeah. And so I'd love to back up just a little bit because I think, a lot of people have been doing a lot of work and it seems like they've been making progress over time on their performance management systems. And we love to talk about how we understand the brain and how to really get individuals to kind of build new habits and really tap into the core models of the brain to get them to perform at their best. So what is it about the brain that helped us kind of build our own talent and performance management field and practice? Because we've been building it for 25 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me at least, definitely this place of looking at the literature. I think like when you talk to different scientists, some of these insights are clear as day for them, right? Where it's like, hey, if you encourage a certain type of mindset, these are the outcomes you get, right?
Yeah.
People are less receptive to feedback, they're less able to learn. When you put people in a threat state, this is what happens. They are less able to collaborate, less able to perform. When you do X, you get Y.
Yeah.
And when you're close to the science and then you see how little application there is at
Yeah.
work or in day-to-day life, it's almost painful.
Yeah.
And so we've done a lot of research on that threat and reward state in the brain, while also looking at the key elements or categories that drive human motivation. And then thinking about, okay, well, then how do we weave that into a performance cycle? And all of that research helped us see a couple of things. One is that we frequently talk about those critical conversations that need to happen in a cycle. And so we've broken them down into 6 critical conversations or conversation types that we want to prepare managers to have. There's goal setting conversations, check-in conversations, feedback conversations, career conversations, end of year conversations, and compensation discussions. And then if you can teach a manager how to manage the brain-based dynamics in each one of those types of conversations, whether they happen separately or whether they, in real time when we're
Yeah.
communicating, get pushed together, a manager can learn and know exactly how in goal setting to manage cognitive capacity and say, hey, instead of 50 things, let's really help you prioritize. Instead of talking about being the best and potentially triggering fixed mindset, talking about pushing learning and development and incremental mastery of different topics or goals. In feedback, you can encourage people to ask for feedback, which we know based on our research helps dampen down that threat response. So definitely very critical. And again, those 6 conversation types that we build our conversation architecture around and that we love, it's really important to train people on how to understand the dynamics of these unique conversation types. Is their goal setting, a check-in conversation, feedback. Oh, there you go. Feedback,
Mhm.
career, comp, and end of year. Oh, I missed one there. There,
Go.
yeah.
It's hard to keep track of them all.
Yeah.
But I think, and I mean, one of the reasons why they're so useful is that we are also reducing the load on the manager. I mean, as a manager going into these conversations, especially for new managers, and this brings up a whole other conversation that we've been having about developing leaders and managers, but it's a hard conversation to enter. And as we've shown several times over, sometimes those conversations are just as, if not more, stress-inducing and overwhelming for the manager to have, especially if they end up being difficult conversations. And so giving them just the ease, the structure of, this is the way you enter a check-in conversation. And it's just an easy flip of some wording around. So you kind of reduce the overarching threat of the other individual, and then you have a more productive conversation. And we've shown that with these kinds of conversations, especially the feedback conversations, if it's done well, the work afterwards is even better. It's more efficient. You solve problems better. All of those things happen. So you're opening up the world to having better collaboration if you just have the right conversation. So it just makes it easier. And having those 6 distinct conversations laid out and the tools that we can provide laid out, it just makes the whole experience much easier to enter, and then you can focus on the actual work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a really important part of that is also when you're designing your system or redesigning your process, it's important to think about those conversation types as you think about the overall architecture of the system. But to help it be really automatic, really seamless for managers, you can make it so easy for them. You can make it so, so easy. How do you set those expectations? How do you create clarity and accountability? And you can give them the answer. For goal setting, how do you stretch and inspire? And then in the conversations, like manage that threat state, bring people into that sense of manageable threat, of reward even, and get them thinking more critically. So you can make it super automatic where managers know the 3 most important questions to ask to drive those objectives or those outcomes. And then they know exactly what to say. And it's really helpful, I think, in this process. Something we've learned through our research is any type of mental contrasting you can provide,
Yeah.
super, super helpful.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, when you tell people, well, like, make it manageable, everybody says, well, I do that. And it's not until you show them, like, okay, well, you're going to be tempted to say, we don't really need to talk so much. You're a great performer. Why don't we just end early? And you have that moment to yourself where you're like, oh, shoot, I do say that. And instead, like, say, okay, if you really want to inspire and motivate somebody, then you need to say, hey, I'm here for you. I'm here to help you learn and grow. I want to see what you've done, and I'm committed to your success overall.
Yeah, absolutely. Showing up for them as well. So
Yeah.
we're getting so much in the chat. We really appreciate all this. It's hard to even keep track, but we have a great question from Marianne. And this is a good one for any manager who has a lot of individuals, direct reports under them. It becomes a challenge when a manager has more than 20 individuals reporting to them. Is there a technique or a model or a way to make this just less burdensome?
Yeah. That is
Tricky one.
incredibly difficult. Yeah.
Mhm.
And we see that, I mean, this is so commonplace in retail environments, on a plant floor or a shop floor, where you have even the added dynamic of shift work. And like you're working with not just one manager, but your shift manager. There are a couple things that you can do. So again, if you give your managers and your employees that understanding of what makes a successful conversation, and you really lean into feedback, that's a place where in those environments where you have 20 plus direct reports, you can set up these almost automatic ways for people to receive more continuous feedback throughout the workday. And not only that, but you teach employees to help each other with feedback. So it's not all just the manager helping 20 individuals. It might be a team of 20 or 21 helping each other. And
Yeah.
so in this example, teaching people to ask for feedback, which is our method, it's been our method for, I feel like we're coming up on, we'll be at the 10-year mark soon. I don't
Yeah.
know, I think it was
Yeah.
2016 or 17, launched our ask for feedback approach.
Yeah.
Um, and in all the organizations that we've helped train with our Improve program, where we're teaching them how to
Mhm.
ask, what makes good feedback, even also how to give unsolicited feedback, which is
Mhm.
necessary a lot of
Which
the
just
time.
happens. Mhm.
If you teach people to ask for feedback and you give them the clarity of those expectations, what am I holding you accountable for? Then people can start to see that, and you can either work on team level feedback, you can encourage people to ask for feedback with each other, and that really helps lighten the load for those managers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
And you can imagine if you develop this culture of feedback, then all of those other conversations are going to be easier because
Mhm.
you've maintained their momentum to a level where it's not waving up and down. They're expecting you to check in on them. And they've likely been able to approach their goals at more of a steadier state so that there won't be as many of those performance gap conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I have a question for you, Emma, but like, what do you see coming up from a research perspective, like with what our clients are asking? Because I mean, we're hearing so much about accountability, about growth
Yeah.
mindset. What's coming up for you?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think, and a lot of this is coming up in the chat as well. I think all of the change is making it very uncertain about how we're supposed to get to this level of high performance. And so we're getting this, and you mentioned this earlier, this request for everyone needs to have high performance, but what is that? It's absolutely going to look different depending on the organization and how it's measured, and how you get there is going to be different as well, depending on how the teams are built and what roles are being played on the team. But that goal of high performance, and then adding in the factors of a hybrid workplace and this need for accountability. So we're trying to kind of understand all of these. And this is also coming up a bit in the chat, but the idea that every organization is different and every performance management system is going to be it should be catered to the organization. So if you were to say, let's just get rid of performance reviews altogether, that may work for some organizations, depending on their organizational goals and their business goals. But what about those organizations that really need to have those performance reviews? They need to be able to track their employees in some way.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We have done so much research on whether it be feedback or managing threat in different
Mhm.
performance conversations. Something that I think just comes up year after year is those really, really, really focused outcomes on
Yeah.
growth, inspiration, and clarity. And when you design your system overall, I mean, it can be a filter for any of you that are working towards a performance management revamp,
Mhm.
whether you're in the beginning or the end, looking through your process and actually taking inventory of, do these steps, does this documentation help people focus on growth? Does what I've designed help create a culture of accountability so that people can do more and feel good about what they're doing instead of actually hindering their thoughts and their emotions and their creative problem solving? And then as a result of the process, the system, the steps, are people walking away getting the clarity that they need, and feeling inspired enough to go do something. And that sounds very simple, but when you actually start to look at your process through the lens of that filter or those filters, a lot of it becomes very clear, right?
Mhm.
We have people setting 50 different goals, 20 different goals, 10 different goals even.
Mhm.
We have them focusing on what they can achieve instead of what will help them grow. We help them create these exhaustive lists that are almost to-do lists, and that's what they're encouraged. Like, those are easy places where you can say, am I getting growth out of my folks? Are they really stretching themselves?
Mhm.
And if not, then what is going to be the most important thing to help them grow? And
Yeah.
so, like in those goal setting conversations, using that growth mindset language, encouraging people to stretch themselves, a natural part of performance, sharing just even the language and the expectations, right? That accountability, the positive accountability,
Mhm.
that as an organization, you are accountable to grow as an individual,
Yeah.
to improve your performance, to be the best version of yourself through an active process with your manager, with the organization, versus deliver as much as possible and
Yeah.
give me that list. Like, I myself have had performance reviews where I remember preparing before them, literally sitting down and writing out every single thing I had done that year. I was just like, okay, I wrote this process and I did every single thing I had done the year so that I could come with justification, most of it unimportant, but I wanted
Mhm.
that list to be as long as possible, not as
Right.
meaningful as possible. Like,
Right.
that's where you really want to flip things on their head.
Yeah, right. And align with the organizational goals. I mean, so how can you, I mean, and we know from the idea of aligning individuals to a shared set of goals, they're more likely to lean in. And so all of those pieces of intrinsic motivation.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you about one of the things that organizations are facing now is just the generational differences, right? So we have different ways now to then motivate different generations. And uncertainty around how to even work with the different generations. I mean, these are huge challenges for organizations. So how do you manage the performance management process to adapt to each generation?
Yeah, that is a really interesting question because we are hearing a lot about, this is the
Mhm.
first time we're having 5 generations
Yeah.
in the workplace working together. And it's so interesting. We actually spend a lot of time at work, like thinking about how do we communicate to others? How do I give this feedback? How do I have a performance review given this person's personality, this situation? And so I have two answers to that. Is one is kind of a longer term answer, which is there are some basic principles of how we run, right? Like at NLI, we're always talking about the brain's organizing
Mhm.
principle. Like everything you do, your brain is saying, is this a threat
Mhm.
or is this something I want to engage in?
Mhm.
All of the time, you're making that judgment
Yeah.
call. And that is a universal truth across generations. Figuring out the nuance of how to manage that, like again, another universal truth. There are 5 domains of social motivation. So anytime that we work with organizations to either improve their performance practices or their process or train managers, so manager capability work is essential to any type of change with performance management. And we've been helping managers for, 26 years improve
Mhm.
the quality of their conversations. That is one of our biggest breakthroughs
Mhm.
a long while back, but our Connect program
Mhm.
and I think that's
That's
again
huge.
90% behavior
Yeah.
change we see in folks that go through that. 90% of people having better performance conversations that create insight, growth mindset, and accountability. Uh,
Mhm.
our improved program where we have people asking for feedback, where again, we're getting really high behavior change numbers. Our develop program for career conversation. So really leaning into helping people have those conversations using those universal truths. I think that
Mhm.
that is kind of the long-term way to bolster
Right.
your
Okay.
organization.
Yeah.
I would say the short-term way, maybe this is the funner or maybe the cheekier way. We've been seeing people play with AI recently.
Yeah.
And so even with our own AI tool, I've heard a lot. I mean, so many people are using our Niles tool right now for performance issues.
Yeah.
They're typing into Niles, which is our AI leadership coach,
Mhm.
our, neuro leadership
Neurointelligent.
answer.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
neurointelligent answer.
Yeah.
And they're literally typing in, hey, I have a performance conversation.
Mhm.
Help me um, write a text message about it, which
Yeah.
might be for a Gen Z person where that's
Yeah.
something that you do on your team. I have other people that are saying, hey, actually, help me write a long email about this to meet this person's communication style.
Mhm.
Hey, I'm walking into this conversation with somebody who's really stuck in their ways, and I'm anxious about how to give feedback. And then you have these AI tools that can either role play with you in the moment
Mhm.
or give you an answer that is tailored for that generation when you put that criteria into the prompt. When you say, hey, I'm talking to somebody who's been telling me they want more purpose at work. They want to feel connected to our mission as an organization. How can I help this person
Yeah.
see more value in the administrative work that they have to do? Because not everything can be bells and whistles. We all have to do administrative work. How do I give that feedback? And or like a finely tuned AI tool geared
Mhm.
towards leaders can give you that immediate answer.
Yeah. Oh, I love both of those answers. I mean, I think we've all been using Niles a lot, and it's amazing how much Niles is able to really answer exactly what we need in the moment. Um, but also, I completely agree with your first answer. I think that like at our core, just because we come from a different generation, we are intrinsically motivated to improve ourselves, and we have a set of values that we and an ideal set of self that we want to approach, and a way to really like boost our motivation towards our goals. And I think if we're able to access that, and it might just be trying to understand the best way to communicate that to individuals. So maybe it's a text message as opposed to an email. Maybe it's, trying to figure out the best way that these individuals work. To get their work done and reach their goals. And so I think it might just mean that managers, should look for other opportunities to reach those employees. And it's just another obstacle that we're facing.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes those generational differences, I mean, there's difference in our lived
Mhm.
experience across the board, even outside of generations.
Yeah.
But there's so much I hear, like what you're saying is so powerful because even like this perception of in group, out group, we're
Mm.
different. We're
Mhm.
not really working on the same
Yeah.
things. It
Yeah.
it can be divisive and it create this unnecessary friction in these conversations.
Yeah.
And so, and we have like in our conversation architecture, we teach people to work in ways that does not create a sense of outgroup. So
Yeah.
like even just as simply as starting a conversation with a shared goal,
Mhm.
saying, we are both here because we care about X.
Mhm.
And in a performance context, that can be the employee. It can be like, hey, we're both here because we want you to grow and develop as quickly as possible. We're both here to look at what you've achieved in the year, and I want to help you grow. I know you want to grow. I want to help you grow. That immediately changes. I mean, in an instant, can change a sense of in group, out group, and create in group between you and whoever the person is on the other
Yeah.
side, no matter what generation they're in.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the research on how we form a group, it's so fascinating, and it's so simple. It's as simple as placing individuals on a team. Now, all of a sudden, you're just more attuned to them. You want to help them. You show this pro-social behavior. So I think it's amazing that sometimes we don't take that extra step, and it's so simple to get everyone on the same page. And this actually relates to a question that Helen just dropped in the chat. I think this is really interesting, the cultural awareness, right?
Mhm.
So just as generational awareness is one piece, now we're much more global. So have you experienced any organizations that have had to address performance management across cultures?
Yeah, yeah. And it's a tricky one. And
Mhm.
where I see this weigh really heavily on people and create a sense of risk aversion is actually within senior leaders in the organization. And so at the manager level, Like you have to have that cultural competency, you have to have that cultural awareness and managing different folks and different identity backgrounds and experiences. Senior leaders tend to be navigating that at a different scale, where they're not only managing the interpersonal aspects of that, but they're managing different regulatory concerns, legal concerns, preferences across countries and regions, and they're bouncing through those conversations at a speed that makes it very difficult to keep track of things. And so I think I see when we're working with many organizations, senior leaders really trying to get it right, but also there's a lot of risk aversion there because the dynamics are so complex for them that it feels safer. Again, like I mentioned, that regression that we're seeing with so many people, it feels safer to like, oh, why don't we just pause, and how about I give you a rating and I'll give you a number, and then you'll know how I feel about you. And the cognitive work, the risk and anxiety I feel about that, like we might not have to get into that, or we don't have. So there's something in helping even our senior leaders navigate where, again, if you can make the conversations automatic, if you can tell people exactly what to ask, and you can give them an understanding of those dynamics and those first principles. And that can be done really easily. So in our work with organizations, I mean, we will tell folks and give them kind of the secret ingredients for create a sense of in-group, create a reward state, manage these differences, ask for permission before you do things, to create a space where with very little prep, very little effort, you can jump in and have a really positive conversation around goal setting, feedback. I mean, all of the things that cause so many people anxiety as they go through these processes.
I know. And and they feel kind of drawn in, they have to do it, they have to check that box, but it is absolutely amazing that you're able to do these very simple steps first, and it reduces, and we've shown in our feedback study, it reduces the anxiety levels of both sides by half at least. And so it's definitely worth it to take those steps and add those pieces to the conversation. And as we often work with organizations to build habits, this might be different, right, at first, and it might be a little bit of a lift to try these ways and not go back to the normal patterns. As you're saying, this is a response to threat, just to go back to what worked in the past. Just like the return to office was, let's just bring everyone back to the office in one fell swoop, and that was also let's just go back to what worked, because that made a lot of sense. But as we know, things change, and there are different ways of approaching individuals. The environment is different now, so we do have to change with it. And so by making those slight changes to your conversations and then trying to do it over time, that will reinforce the behavior, and you're more likely to build that habit.
Yeah. And we're getting people asking in the chat about some of those steps, right?
Yeah.
Like those tying down to those first principles. I will say there isn't just a silver bullet that you can put in place for everybody. I mean, I'll share some of the first principles in a second and things that work for everybody. But when we work with organizations, we take careful time to look at, where are you right now? What are you trying to achieve as an organization? You can do that pretty fast. You can do that. I mean, honestly, in a week, you can get your mind wrapped around where somebody is with the right data collection and the right inputs and conversations. To then know we're all about what the essential is. We're all about, we're not going to throw everything in the kitchen sink at you, but in a really targeted way, what's going to move the needle for you in these conversations. And a lot of the time, it's creating that sense of in-group. These are the steps that I use with many organizations and that we teach many organizations. Creating that sense of in-group, creating those shared goals, helping activate a sense of reward, or moving people to a place of manageable threat, right? We all know, or most of us know, that Yerkes-Dodson bell curve, where it's like the amount of attention or arousal, right, help
there's an optimal spot.
There's a place where a little bit of stress can help you pay attention. There's a place where a little bit of stress can help you perform better. And
Yeah.
there's a big part of that curve where it is not good. It is not like too much stress is bad. And so helping people tune into what motivates them so that they can be in a manageable threat state, in a place where they can listen and think,
Yeah.
and really activating that growth mindset. And
Yeah.
the trick is, I think, doing it in a way where it doesn't feel like this heavy multi-step process, but
Mhm.
that it's automatic through
Yeah.
great questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the right questions are key. So we're getting some amazing comments and questions and a lot of stories, I think, in the chat as well, which is great. But Catherine asked a question in the Q&A about connecting performance management with pay and what happens when we detach that. Do you have any thoughts on the benefit of detaching, pay decisions from performance management?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch. I will say that for so many organizations that we work with, what happens if pay and performance is linked in this really maladaptive way, as we see with most organizations, what you get is people wanting to reward their employees,
Yeah.
unable to do so unless they can
Mhm.
inflate ratings,
Yeah.
unable to do so unless they can have really superficial performance conversations. Um, and so if you're seeing that, if you're seeing everybody in your organization is, 90% of people are at the very tippy top, they're the
Mhm.
best performers in the world, there's something to explore there, especially when it's tied to compensation.
Mhm.
So immediately you can start to suss out, okay, there's a reward here that people are working toward. And I think that's a good place to start to untangle the differences between pay and compensate, or performance and compensation. And at a
Yeah.
minimum, I think we would advise our clients, and we do advise our clients, to separate those end of cycle and the compensation discussion. So you do get a cleaner conversation around what's working, what areas for growth are. When you
Mhm.
start with those compensation decisions, I mean, the conversation just falls flat. It's like, this is what you're going to get.
Yeah.
And there's really, you box yourself in as a manager when you start there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we know from the research that financial reward is absolutely motivating. There's nothing to say that financial reward isn't, but there is an additional motivational drive that comes from all of the other types of rewards that we get. So like career mobility is a huge motivator. Social recognition is a huge motivator. So like matching and talking about like where you want your career to be and see the growth and your skill set grow and all of those things, separate from also the compensation, and there that is the additional boost that sometimes people need. So I totally agree, separating those if possible is great.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also saw a great question
Mm.
asking about, well, thinking about that, when you're paying for performance, how do you
Mhm.
encourage a growth mindset?
Yeah.
And a great way that we see many organizations do this is actually, as part of your performance criteria, you can include different elements like somebody's propensity to stretch themselves, to learn and
Mm.
develop over time. In
Yeah.
your performance criteria, as people are thinking about what rating to give or how to do that year-end evaluation without a rating, you can tell them, hey, you're not only looking at somebody's performance in terms of the what did you
Mhm.
accomplish with your goals? What were the results? Give me the numbers. Did you make it? But you can look at the how, and
Mhm.
specifically conversations around that how. Did you push yourself? Were
Mhm.
these goals really important?
Mhm.
Did you ask for feedback throughout the cycle? Were you focused on improving? Were you a collaborative team player is something that I see all the time.
Mhm.
You can work within your process to add equal value or support within the conversation in an equal way what somebody achieved, what made them good, what helped them grow, and then and that's how you tease out that how. And if it's part of the criteria, then they should be rating on both.
Mhm.
So yes, you achieved
Yeah.
your goals, that weren't maybe that important, that required zero stretch, that were as safe as can be. You know, if I get something on did you achieve your goals and how that happened, even with a rating scale, a manager has a little more leeway to rate that person as maybe just meeting expectations, or sometimes it's inconsistently meeting expectations because of that how.
Yeah, such a great point. And I think also by doing that, you're also helped to instill this a culture of growth mindset as well, and the fixed mindset of competition. If it's just strictly based on reaching a certain level, a certain set of goals or output, let's say, it's much easier to build this competition within an organization. And so you're instantly reducing the likelihood of collaboration. You're instantly reducing the likelihood of individual growth as well, as we know the power of a growth mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
absolutely. Yeah. So, well, one question for you in terms of those, getting back to those conversations, for you as a manager, what would you say are like the most powerful conversations for you at getting your team to perform? Or what has worked the best for you?
Oh, that's a really great question. Anybody that knows me knows I'm a big fan of feedback.
Mhm.
Feedback throughout the week, feedback throughout the month, like getting feedback, giving feedback. I think that really understanding what makes feedback good,
Yeah.
and creating cultures of feedback is a huge aspect. It's just a huge thing to get right. Um, and in research that we did, I mean,
Yeah.
we had some research that we published a while back where we saw that like asking for feedback, there's tons of data around this, but that we're asking for feedback is one of these critical differentiators for your culture of feedback, but also for that interpersonal dynamic that you
Yeah.
see between a manager and an employee. I
Mhm.
think in our research, we saw that when people asked for feedback, it actually alleviates a lot of the anxiety that the feedback giver has.
Yeah.
And so we talked about
Powerful.
that threat state earlier on, but you know, we didn't talk about the fact that managers actually experience threat states too. And when you
Yeah.
have to give somebody feedback, I mean, managers spend so many hours ruminating on what am I going to say? How is this conversation going to go? Are they going to hear me? Are they going to have a big emotional response? Am I going to be able to handle this? How much do I have to prep? You know, and I mean, you spend hours and hours agonizing over whether you're going to be heard,
Yeah.
whether you're going to hurt somebody.
Yeah.
It's like
Yep.
something that people think about all the time. And so when you can change that dynamic and create cultures where people are asking for feedback weekly, you actually eliminate the threat set, or you minimize the threat state for managers so that they can be clearer and be more creative and problem solve, because their own threat state gets in the way of great performance management. Um, and we're seeing in the chat, Joshua, sad how many people managers don't get training on how to deliver
Oh, yeah.
feedback. Yeah. I wish, I mean, you know, before earlier in my career, you know, I
Mhm.
wish somebody would have said, this is how you can ask for feedback. I mean, so
Mhm.
often I was so hungry for, you know, I want this. And I heard similar things from peers. And I still hear that today from the
Mhm.
clients that we work with, from folks in different organizations. People want to grow and they don't know how to get useful feedback. Managers want people to change and they don't know how to give useful feedback. Um,
Absolutely.
Definitely a huge issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we'll, as humans, we're looking for feedback anyways. So if you're not giving it as a manager in the right way, they're going to look for feedback in every other single that you're giving. So a lack of feedback, or maybe just your responses, or so I think without it, as you said, we're hungry for feedback and we'll react to whatever we're getting. And so if you're not giving feedback on what they're doing well, and this is one of the ways that we talk about giving feedback, it's not just giving feedback on areas to improve, but making sure they continue to do those things that they do well.
Mhm.
So giving that's very specific feedback, you know, you're doing great at these kinds of presentations, but you just need to work on X, Y, and Z. So I think that you're able to get someone to exactly where they want to be because they'll use that feedback to their advantage. But I agree. I think imagine how much difference we could see if individuals are giving feedback and asking for feedback often.
Yeah, yeah. And we got some great comments in the chat
Mhm.
now where people were
Yeah.
saying, as we're thinking about feedback, as we're thinking about encouraging employees to grow
Mhm.
themselves and push themselves, that there's a fine line between pushing yourself towards burnout or pushing
Yeah.
yourself in a maladaptive way. And I think there's a question in there
Yeah.
around how NLI thinks about that balance.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really interesting question, and it's something that everybody should think about in their performance processes and their feedback conversations. So one of the first thing I'll mention is, and I love that we included these types of steps in so we just made like a brand new, this wonderful distillation of this really broad set of IP, our foundational program, our gold standard program for the neuroscience of management for managers and leaders, people that are learning how to balance these things for the first time, and those also that are working at a higher level, our lead program. And we have some of these skills in that lead program. We're teaching people, okay, how do you push accountability? How do you push your performance and learning and growth? And at the same time, encouraging people, like literally in the program, also take a walk. Balance yourself. Like sometimes taking a walk and getting some fresh air is
Mhm.
actually what you need to do to help yourself have better connections, consider new ideas, creatively problem solve. So that's definitely like the question that was asked, definitely in line with what we're thinking and how we're trying to train the next generation of amazing thinkers and thought leaders and leaders. But honestly, when you think about not just growth and performance, but as I said, and I was always thinking about what are those key ingredients? What are those first principles? And cognitive capacity and emotional regulation are
Mhm.
huge parts of that. And
Yeah.
so we also help managers see and employees see if you're feeling burnout, if you can't even read the words on the page, something's off there.
Yeah.
That's a maladaptive
Mhm.
way of pushing yourself, of growing yourself. Growth should feel hard but productive.
Mhm.
Growth should feel a little scary in an exciting way, in a good way. It should not feel like this never-ending grind. And there's a secret to it.
Mhm. Oh, that's such a great point. I love all those. Yeah. I think and one of the ways that we kind of integrated those thoughts into lead was that we started by asking people to focus on themselves, which is something that managers tend to do the last of, right? So we by understanding the limits of your capacity and developing strategies to really work best with it so you can focus best, regulate your emotions, develop strategies before you even go into the conversation with your direct reports. You're able to have a better conversation and pick up all those difficult skills like how do you delegate work? How do you have those difficult conversations? All of those pieces, or deal with conflict, for instance, which is also increasing. All of those difficult things are much easier when you've managed your capacity and developed those easy strategies. So I think all of those very simple things, you can find those in all of the ways that we work with organizations, right? It's all based on the very simple models of the brain, but used in different ways. And it's amazing to me always how simple those little tricks and strategies can be with such great rewards.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So this has been amazing. Great conversation. I hope we can do it again. The conversation in the chat has been incredible. I wish we could have, jumped onto all of that. I hope this was useful for you all.
Mhm.
Any last words, Rachel?
Uh, Take care of your brain. Ask for more feedback. Do that. Ask for more feedback.
Yeah, awesome. Amazing. So I guess we'll pass it back on to Shelby. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Emma and Rachel, for today's discussion. We really appreciate your time and everything that you shared. Just a few more closing announcements before we head out. So we will put up a poll to let us know how NLI can help you. A couple of announcements. We have our summit survey link, We're getting summit planning underway and our website will be going live soon, but we want to hear from you about what you're interested in for this year's summit. So please make sure you check that out and participate. Insider Exchange, this is specifically for senior executives. If you really enjoy this show, we think you'll love this program. It's an opportunity to have roundtable discussions with our leaders internally to look at new innovations that we're working on at NLI. So if you'd like to be a part of that, follow the link in the chat and we can have you apply. If you want to partner with us, and we are really looking to expand our community, we have hosting NLI events. So partner with us. If you are interested, check out the link and you can apply there. And our podcast, if you enjoyed today's conversation, we always have our Your Brain at Work podcast. So wherever you listen, check that out. And this is where we officially say farewell. So on behalf of our team and everyone behind the scenes, we appreciate you. Have a great weekend and we'll see you next week.